Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Torah study for Shabbos morning, and I am Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this wonderful Shabbos by my dear friend Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the Collaborative, a wonderful learning program that she leads and organizes, and we're delighted to have time to study Torah with Sherry. Sherry, hi, good morning.
Rabbi
Shabbat Shalom.
Feinstein, happy to see you.
Great to see
Always.
you too. We are right in the thick of the book of Genesis today, and in the thick of a conversation that the Bible is going to have with us about this idea of covenant. It's something we began talking about last week. God approaches this man, Abraham, and says, I need you. I need a partner in the world. I need someone to carry my blessings into the world. I need someone to represent me in the world. I need a partner. And the parameters of the features, the qualities of that relationship are what's spelled out in this Torah portion, because we have a series of episodes, and they all have to do with this question of what does it mean when God comes to a human being and says, enter into a relationship with me, I need your help. I need you. It's a very different God, by the way, than the God we learn in philosophy, who is perfect and needs nobody. This is a God who really does need relationship and a God who needs help in the world. So the story begins, it's called Vayera because it begins with three angels showing up at Abraham's tent. And it turns out he thinks they're travelers, so he invites them in quickly for a meal, rushes about forming a meal, putting a meal together. And at the meal, they announce that they are angels. And in fact, they have good news to share. At least the first one does. And he wishes Abraham and Sarah Mazel Tov, they're going to be parents. To which Sarah begins to laugh because she is, how we put this gently, well past the years of childbearing. And Abraham is well into the years of Viagra. And yet God says it's a miracle. And the
That
baby,
thing well into the years of Viagra. Sorry.
I, I was trying
I
to,
had to stop and laugh.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be prurient in any way. But the Bible's not afraid of this. That's part of the beauty of the biblical story is that it's not afraid of recognizing that this is part of life. And old people get old, but not these people. There's something vital in both of them, something powerful in both. And a child enters the world. And of course, then there's going to be some issues because, of course, there's already a kid. There's already Ishmael. And what's the relationship between the two of them? And that's going to bring us tsaras. And that's the first story. And it goes on from there. The most remarkable story in my book that I think is remarkable here is the story of what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah. So it says that God looks down into the world and sees these two towns, these two cities that are filled with evil. And of course, the later Midrash is going to go to town asking what was exactly the evil. And God says to Abraham, I have to wipe this place out. But before he
He
does,
deliberates.
he
Yeah. Sorry.
ruminates. Yeah, no, you got it exactly right. He ruminates and says, "Hamichaseh anim me Avramani yoseh." Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? And it's God talking to God. And the wonderful thing is that the answer to that question is, of course, you should hide from Abraham. You're God. Like me, I'm a married guy, so I'm accountable to my wife. I work for a community, so I'm accountable to the community. Any of us who are in the thick of relationship, we're accountable to the folks that we share those relationship with. But is God accountable to anybody? Does God have to explain? Does God have to tell somebody where God's going to be this afternoon and how to get hold of me if you need to find me? And the answer is, well, yes, because now that you are covenanted, covenant means being accountable. And that's a remarkable fact. And so he goes to Abram and he says, okay, these towns are horrifying. I have to destroy them. And then ensues a conversation, which, if it wasn't written in the Bible, you would think it was heretical. Because Abraham says, you can't do that because you're a God of justice. And if there's 50 good guys left in the city, you can't wipe them all out. And God says, okay, I'll take 50. You find me 50, I'll save the city. And now Abraham, who has sold enough camels in the shuk of Beersheba, says, 50? You said 50 is okay. How about 45? How about 40? How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? And it sounds like an auction, which is exactly how ridiculous it's supposed to sound because it's trying to play on this idea of a God who needs us and is therefore prepared to enter into moral deliberation with us. Sherry, you ever argue with
Literally,
God like that?
no, I have so many comments that I want to make, and it was such a beautiful telling of Viera. But I just have to start by going back a couple seconds, which is the deliberation that God has with himself or herself about whether he should say something to Abraham
Mhm.
is such a question of our own lives. When we are covenant with someone, how honest do we need to be with them?
Mm.
What do we need to tell them? Do we need to tell them about every purchase of every pair of shoes? Right? Like, does my husband need to know about every pair of shoes I buy? Or what really, how honest do I need to be? And I think that's a question that God is grappling with and recounts to us in the Torah to ask us, how honest do we need to be when we're truly covenanted with someone? And you always hear that relationships broke down because there was a lack of communication, but a lack of transparency and
Mm.
honesty, right? So that's first level. I think that was like something the Torah really wants to tell us. And then we get to the negotiation, which I think is, I love that you referenced that Abraham has always been a businessman. He and Lot were always businessmen. So it makes sense that he would negotiate, right? That feels like that's part of his genetic wiring. But when you subject yourself to asking someone their thoughts about something, you have to anticipate that they may agree, disagree, or offer something else. And I'm not sure that God anticipated that. I
Right.
think when God said, should I tell him? He didn't say, should I ask him? He said, should I tell him? And then the irony is, Abraham sees it as a question. Well, since you're bringing that up, let's negotiate, right? So there's also something very revealing in the human psyche about when we solicit or tell people something that's sacred to us or something that's going to happen. How open are we to really hearing what they have to say about it? Do
Right.
we really want to know what they think, or are we just alerting them? Right. And you see that all the time in marriage. Sometimes I'm talking to my husband because I just want to alert him. This is what is happening. And he comes back with, well, did you consider this? Or have you thought about this? Or I think actually that's not a good idea. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't solicit a question. I was just informing. Right. But I think that's what the Torah is trying to tell us right there is sometimes we're informing, but if we're really covenanted with someone, they have an obligation to actually respond, even if they don't agree. And that's
Mm.
what Abraham does.
But let's go one more step though, because even though there's a relationship here, it's not a relationship of equals. God is God after all. Abraham is Abraham after all. And so the question that the Torah, the thing that makes the whole story astonishing is why does God put up with this? I mean, in a certain way, it's
Yeah,
not
but you
you.
made an assumption that they're equals.
I know
We perceive them as equals, but
that's
God
what.
may, the moment God said, should I tell Abraham, God may have seen himself no longer as God Elyon, right? The God on high, but rather as God of this land, God of a relationship and a pure. And so for Abraham to negotiate with him, it's not so surprising to God.
But
It could
the
go both
question is,
ways.
why does God put up with it? Why doesn't God say, shut up? I'll give you the example. The count. I always believe that the Bible is written in dialogues, just like the Talmud. It's just harder to find the other side of the dialogue.
Oh, very interesting.
And the other side of the dialogue is the book of Job. In the book of Job, a man suffers and he turns his eyes toward heaven and he screams, why are you doing this to me? For 38 chapters, he screams, why are you doing this to me? And only in the last 3 chapters of the book does God answer him. And God doesn't give him an explanation. God simply says, shut up. You're a person. You're nothing. Miata, who are you to question me? I'm God. Here it's different. Here, God doesn't say that to Abraham. here Abraham challenges God, and God doesn't squish him like a bug, which is what you'd expect, right? Why does God put up with this kind of moral challenge?
Well, I would argue, and you and I have thought about this together, but Abraham feels much more, I mean, God feels much more accountable to Abraham than he does to Job. They're not in
Ab-
the same relationship,
Right, right.
right? What his relationship with Abraham is a true covenant. And when you have a covenant with someone, you are obligated to them, for them. You are responsible for being with them, right? And vice versa. But he doesn't have that with Job.
Hmm.
He has no covenant with Job.
And the purpose of the covenant was to find a human being who would represent God's justice in the world. And that's what Abraham is arguing. He's not saying, do this for me, or do this for my gain, or do this for something that I get out of it. He's arguing on the basis of their common embrace of justice as a vision of the world that it ought to be. What does Abraham say to God? Hashofet kol haaretz lo yasem mishpat. You are the judge of all the earth. We share a common vision of a just world, of a just society. You have to behave in that way. It's like I don't know, imagine if your children have ever challenged you, but my children, yes. But when a
No.
child challenges you, not because they want something, not because they want to get something out of you, but on the basis of a value that you taught them, and you suddenly realize before you answer back and argue with them that they are representing your values better than you are. Like, Mom, you got to do this because you always said, and you stop a moment. Yeah, I mean, no one wants to be pushed back by a kid, but on the other hand, there's a moment of pride. Like, oh my God, she gets it. He gets it. I think that's God. I think God is kvelling. That's a
So
technical word.
interesting. I love that analogy. I just have to ask you a question, Rabbi
Oh,
Feinstein, which is how could Abraham be so just and fight for the people and really literally enact God's justice in the world and to be that person? And yet, in the same chapter, right away offer up his daughters, right?
no, not the
I
right.
mean,
So
Lot's daughters. I'm
Lot's
sorry.
daughters,
I'm sorry.
but you're
Lot's
right.
daughters.
The question is
Yes.
the right question because at the end of this Torah portion, right, is the Akedah. When God is going to come
Yes.
to
Sorry.
Abraham and
Thank you.
say, take your son, your only one, the one you love, take Isaac, bring him to the place I'm going to show you and make him an offering there. And without a word of question, of protest, of demur, of hesitation, Abraham goes to do it. Abraham goes to do it. And so, what this Torah portion gives us is two Abrahams and two models of covenant. There's a model of covenant where God invites us into moral conversation, moral argument, because we share a common vision of a just world. And then there's this other one. There's the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, which is a model of covenant where God says, do it, and we do it obediently and immediately and without hesitation. And there's a sense of subservience in that and acquiescence.
That's what's so misunderstood in the world is when is it, which covenant are we supposed to be following? And that's where you get fundamentalists and all kinds of people saying, well, this is God's word, right?
Right,
So
right.
to decipher and to distinguish and to discern when is this a place that I'm supposed to push back on God? And when is this place that I'm supposed to obediently follow?
Yeah.
I think is one of the very challenges of being
What,
human.
when do you fight back and when do you accept? When do you fight back and when do you accept? You know, you and I have both had cases where we have been with families in a hospital with a loved one struggling, and we've said to the family, sometimes with the doctors, you know, maybe this isn't the time to fight back. Maybe this is the time to accept, which is hard to say because you have such love for this person and we want them to live. But when you've run out of all the options, sometimes the fighting back is futile and it takes so much life away. And acceptance is part of the game. My teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, used to look at the two names of God, Adonai and Elohim, two names of God in the Bible, as those two ethics. Adonai is the ethic of justice, of argue, of fight back, of push back, of oppose injustice in the world, of transform the world. And Elohim is the ethic of there are times when you have to accept. There are times when fighting back isn't going to help. In fact, it hurts. And so it's an interesting model of what it means to be human in the world.
And it's so hard to know. And when you brought up that example of being in a hospital, I've had that so many times where I've been asked, Rabbi, you're telling me it's not time to fight, that maybe it's time to let go. But how do you know? What if you're wrong?
Yeah.
Right? Like I've gotten that pushback. Like, what if you're wrong? You're telling me now's the time to let go. And then it comes to this, well, we may not have a choice, right? That God will decide this for us, whether you fight or whether you don't.
Yeah.
So,
The problem is that God doesn't decide for us now. It's a question of, do I turn off this machine? Do I invoke the next, do I take the next round of chemotherapy? Um, it's so many of these decisions have been put in our hands. And it leaves us with decisions that no sensitive human being is capable of making. And that it's these are very profound
you know,
moments.
they're very profound because you hear people often ask, who am I to play God?
Mm,
Right? How am I supposed to make this decision, Rabbi?
right.
And I find that often in our lives. Like, am I supposed to make this decision? Is this what I'm supposed to step in and intervene? Or is this the decision that I actually am going to concede to God?
So we
And
have these two stories. We have the story of the Akedah at the end of the Parsha and Sodom and Gomorrah at the beginning. Some in the tradition, there was an argument between the two, right? There were those thinkers who said the Sodom and Gomorrah story is normative, and the Akedah is the outlier. The sacrifice of Isaac, the passivity of Abraham, or the obedience, it's the outlier. And then there were others who said, no, the Abraham of the Akedah is the normative story, and the argument of Sodom and Gomorrah is the outlier. And you hear both of this argument going on. And I think you were right about what you said a moment ago, which is in so many ways, that's the definitive question. Which model do you live by? Because if you live by a model which says the highest religious virtue is obedience, you're going to have a certain kind of religious life. And if you live by the motto that says the highest virtue is to fight together for the things that we value, and fight with each other for the things that we value,
I was going to say, not just even fight
assertiveness,
together. Yes, fight
assertive,
within each other.
right, the assertive ethic, you're going to have a very different religious life. And both of them have a place in our faith and our tradition, but it's really interesting to see how they play off of each other.
Well, it's also interesting that you brought up this paradigm of what's normative because we're always trying to ask that question. What's the right way? What's the normal way? Right? Is this the right way is to be obedient or is the right way to be, in conversation and argumentative? And maybe the right way is both,
Yeah.
right? Maybe the right way is to constantly challenge and try to figure out where are those places that I need to be obedient and accepting, and where are those places that I need to be challenging and rigorous, right?
It's wonder. And there was a time, I mean, there was a time, for example, that when women married, they were told, well, now you have to be obedient to your husband. And that was a model of marriage, right? You sacrifice your own internal, whatever, your soul, basically, and become the helpmate in this household, and you are obedient in marriage, and we live in a moment in which women have recovered their voices, thankfully, and now have a very active role in in the determination of a family's course of life, right? And young men have to learn how to listen. I mean, one of the things I teach young men is you really have to learn how to listen to your spouse, because you can't go into every encounter with that same attitude that I'm going to win, which is what young men are taught about everything in life. And it's a really interesting model about assertiveness on one side, and obedience or acceptance on the other, as a
Well,
model for relationship.
it's also not a biblical model.
Yeah.
right? We don't see God speaking to Sarah in the same way throughout this story, right? When God first originally goes to Abraham and says, go for yourself. And next thing we know, Sarah's en route, right? We don't hear anything about her saying, I have some questions. Where will we be going? How
Mm.
long will it take? What's the story? How much should I pack? Like any reasonable wife, Jewish wife for sure, would be like, I need to plan ahead. I need scheduling. Right? Like, I don't know about you, but I mean, my wife and like my husband, your wife, my husband, like I'm a planner. I want to know how it's all going to go down. We don't hear anything from her. And in the Sodom and Gomorrah, we don't hear anything from her. What we do hear from her in this chapter is laughter
Mm.
about not believing in God, which also discredits any precedent for us to really look back at women and say, how are we supposed to be in this situation?
Yeah.
Right? We've got to really fill in the blanks. And I think the Bible gives a script for men that's much more obvious. And the script for women, especially in these early Genesis stories, are much more opaque. And we have to fill in what's missing.
Yet this is something I'm hoping maybe someone's written it and I haven't seen it, but the Torah of Sarah. I mean, to begin it last week with the story last week that he comes home and he says, "Honey, pack the house, we're leaving," and she's like, "What?" Like,
But she doesn't say what. We have no
I
record of
know,
that.
but that's the point. We don't have her voice in the story, and then to Pharaoh in Egypt, and then back to Canaan, and then these stories. The angel comes and says, "You're going to have a kid," and she says, "All right, come on," you know. There's laughter, but one of the interesting questions is what's the quality of that laughter?
Yeah, I love that. I love how the commentators go off on that.
Is it humorous laughter? Is it derisive laughter? What what is she feeling at that moment, And then the baby is born, and it's a really interesting question. And then, at the end of the story, the great question in the story is why is she left out of the story altogether? When I was teaching Bible to junior high school kids, I used to have an assignment, and I say, I want you to write the refrigerator note that Abraham left for Sarah. Dear
And that's
S,
hilarious.
love A. No, it wasn't. It turned out to be quite poignant, actually. Where I've taken the boy. Does he confess what he's doing? Does he own up to what he's about to do? Because does he realize how devastating this will be to her? And is he prepared to accept responsibility for what he's doing? It's a really painful kind of question.
And after the Akedah, we never see them together.
They never talk to each other. She dies in the
Never
middle of it.
again.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting because this idea that he would leave her a note, the first thing I thought is, what if he didn't?
Yes.
What if he didn't leave her a refrigerator note? What if he just was like, I don't even know how to own up to this.
Mm.
So I have nothing to say. Right. When you said, I thought it was funny because I had this vision of a refrigerator in ancient Egypt and ancient Israel, right? Like this didn't exist, right? That's why I laughed. But
Mhm.
again, it's the laugh of disbelief, or is it the laugh of, incredulousness? I don't know if that's the word. But that's an interesting thing, or maybe there was no note.
So the question then, Sherry, is if he didn't leave her a note, what would she have written to him?
That's interesting to me as
Once
well.
she
Like,
figured out what he went to go do.
right. And who did she alert? Did she send a search party? Was she like, we got to go find my son and husband? I don't know where they are. Or was she like tipped off by God on some level? That's
Yeah.
the blank we don't know. God's like, don't worry, don't send a search party. They're fine. And then she sits down and she has something to say to him. And that's her note.
Because the last line of the story is he goes to Beersheba. She's living in Hebron. That's where Kiryat Arba, her home is. She's in Hebron. He doesn't go home. He goes to
They never
Beersheba.
reconcile.
And who's in Beersheba? Hagar is in Beersheba, like the au pair. Please don't try this at home.
No, and the
So
next week is Chaya Sarah. It's the death of Sarah.
and then she's gone, right? So there's a wonderful midrash that I read. I've read different versions of this midrash um, that said when Abraham is at the top of the mountain and he's holding the knife over the boy, and an angel comes and says, Avraham, Avraham, don't touch the kid. And of course, he gives up the project of sacrificing the kid. The question is, why did he listen to that voice? What was it in the quality of that voice that made him hear it? Because after all, he was dead set on doing this thing. And one of the most beautiful answers is it was her voice. It was the voice of the mother. It was the voice that had been left out of his consciousness. It's her voice that he hears that says, don't touch our son. There are certain things more valuable, certain things
Good.
more sacred than what you think you're doing. This is not the way to find your God. I mean, it's a beautiful reconciliation because here he hears her voice and realizes that there's another way. There's a different spirituality that she represents that isn't in the story yet, and that's where it enters the story again.
Midrash is so beautiful on so many levels because it harkens back to when should he be obedient and when should he be challenging. He hears that voice and he doesn't challenge it.
Yeah,
He immediately accepts it. It's not the Abraham of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's the Abraham of the Akedah. And when he hears her voice, it's as if he heard God's voice, right? A greater voice than his own. That's
yeah.
so beautiful.
What a
That
family we
midrash is beautiful.
right. What a family we belong to, huh?
What a family. And not only that, like, I love it. You know, it's like every year it brings us new insights that I think we never exhaust of. It's
So,
just
to
really
all of our
interesting.
friends, this is a wonderful parsha to sit down and discuss. It is a wonderful parsha to sit down and discuss with your partner, your spouse, your best friend. It is a marvelous parsha to discuss with children, as long as they're a little old. Not the last story, maybe, but the Sodom and Gomorrah story. It has so much in it. So please take a moment and look at this parsha this Shabbos, and let this Shabbos be a time of learning. Sherry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to everyone, thanks so very much. Um, Please be aware that this coming week on Wednesday night, Professor Windmuller and I continue our
Oh, yeah.
conversation on the changes that are coming to Jewish life, and we'd be delighted to have you. It's a 7:30 at Valley Beth Shalom. Have a great week, everyone. Stay well. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.